Urban legends are a genre of folklore comprised of claims or stories circulated as being true, especially as having happened to a friend of a friend or a family member. This proximity to the events is often what makes these stories so intriguing and go on to spread throughout popular culture as campfire stories, exchanges on the playground, email chains, and most recently, through proliferation on social media. While these stories are often exciting and entertaining, how true are the events depicted in these stories? Today, we will examine some popular urban legends to determine if these tales are fiction or nonfiction.
Or non-fiction.
You are listening to Fiction.
Or non-fiction.
Hey, Dave, we're back for season 2.
Yes, season 2, or is it season 1.5.6?
You see, that's why I was confused, because I wasn't quite sure what we're back for.
We did a lot of episodes last time, so maybe that's why I'm saying that. But all joking aside, we're here for season 2. Hopefully you listen.
Yes, I hope you listen too. That would be wonderful. That would be a point to us talking. In case you're new to the show or you've only heard a few episodes from the previous season of the podcast, we are a Windsor Public Library-based podcast where we uncover the truth behind viral news stories, stories that spread throughout media, legends, and just unpack whether these stories happen to be based in truth or if they are completely fictitious, which is why we call the show Fiction.
Or nonfiction.
Yes, and Dave, I'm so glad you're here. We're going to have a lot of fun this episode. Actually, last season, we tackled so much subject matter. We talked about a number of different things. Some of the subjects coming to mind right now, El Chupacabra. We talked about the ghost of Texas Road.
Werner's Ginger Ale.
Werner's Ginger Ale is in fact true. It's not a fiction.
And the oldest actual pop that is still in existence.
Yes. On sale. Yes.
Yes.
And then with that said, we also talked about something that's going to lead very nicely into today's case files. And Dave, this season I've come organized.
He has a folder.
I have a folder. And what does it say?
It says nothing on it.
Okay,
kidding.
It's too far away. It says
Fiction or nonfiction, case files, do not open.
But I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to open.
Okay.
And this ties in really well with one of the stories that we talked about last season. And if you do recall, we talked about the urban legend of the Hook.
Oh, yes, we did. It's a famous, infamous, I should say, story people tell, scary story.
Yeah, and what I decided to do for our season premiere, rather than just focus on one particular story and talk about it, I thought, let me give us a charcuterie board of options. Let us actually tackle an entire subsect of legends, urban legends. So this whole episode of Fiction or Nonfiction is going to be talking about urban legends.
Oh, okay. So you're going to grab the stinky cheese of the urban legends and perhaps the prosciutto as well?
Yes, I'm glad you went along with my analogy. Thank you. It was a very smelly analogy. I think the first thing that would be appropriate is to actually discuss what is an urban legend.
You're going to verify this for me. I'm just talking freely. I'm not. Anyways.
Freeform that. Yeah.
It's
Freestyle
basically
it,
like a scary story or an old folk tale that's kind of scary that people tell. Like the man with the hook story. Usually you tell it at night to scare people and warn them as well. To lock your doors and be careful of your surroundings. Things like that.
Exactly. And it's almost always happening to a friend of a friend or an extended family member, which adds a little air of truth or veracity to the stories. That idea that, of course, it's true because someone I know had experienced it. Maybe not someone I know directly, but someone who I know who knows somebody.
Someone I know that I know that I know.
Exactly.
That they know.
Yeah, so by proximity, it makes the stories a little bit more relatable. It makes it a little bit more tangible. But as you said, each urban legend in its own way not only does it concern mysterious or troubling events, it often has a lesson or some sort of moral tale involved to the actual story. So, yeah, very likely what happens with these urban legends is that they spread in order to instill a certain idea, a certain warning, or a certain moral code into the society that this story spreads in. So, for example, the story about the hook really was meant to dissuade young lovers from going out and smooching inside of cars in the 1950s and 60s
Mm-hmm.
because you never know, you could get a hook.
Yeah.
Yep. I hate when that happens. So we'll talk a little bit about urban legends. I actually have, believe it or not one, not 10, but 6 urban legends to share with you.
Are you sure? That's too many.
We'll see.
I'm just kidding.
That might be fiction or nonfiction. I don't know.
Oh, okay. Let's go.
We're gonna go. I'm just gonna talk about the term urban legend. It has appeared in print since at least 1968, and it was used by the American folklorist Richard Dorson. And basically, these are stories that are based on true events or maybe complete fabrications. What we're going to do is go through a selection of very popular urban legends. And as per what we usually do, I'm going to present them to Dave. And Dave is going to use the skills of his detective brain and also what we like to call information literacy to figure out if these are likely true or not. Information literacy is basically a term used to talk about, are you able to parse out the truth of information? So can you actually perform research? Are you able to verify that what you're hearing is correct or if it comes from a reputable source?
Yes, and I wanted to ask, that first bit of information you provided us with about urban legends and its origin, where did you get that from?
Very good, very good. I'm glad you caught on to that. Well, that was actually by a very famous North American folklorist and someone who talks about urban legends. In fact, he has published many books on the subject, Jan Harold Brunvand. And I do want to apologize. Last season, I made a little bit of a faux pas. I constantly pronounced the folklorist's name as not Jan, but Jan Harold Brunvand. My apologies, that's not how you pronounce his name. But he has written many books on the subject of urban legends. This definition is actually taken from The Choking Doberman and Other Urban Legends by Jan Harold Brunvand. And some of his books can actually be picked up from the Windsor Public Library, that he offers many compendiums of urban legends and collections of such stories.
I'm sure he references things in the book too where he got his information.
And that's why I do like Brunvand's work so much, because he does actually talk about the process of how he came across these stories. He talks about sourcing information about how he came across them, and not all of the books talk about the legitimacy of these stories, but in quite a few of his published works, he does break down the likelihood of whether or not these urban legends were true or not.
Okay.
So
let's start.
Yeah, let's start. We're going to get going. Dave?
Can we start with number 2 instead of number 1?
No.
Okay.
Although this is kind of a number 2. I'm sure there's a number 2 involved during the story.
My.
This is the story of The Leaping Lawyer.
Okay.
So I'm going to read this story. I'm going to try to go full Unsolved Mysteries voice for this one.
Okay.
This darkly comic legend tells the story of an egotistic lawyer who attempted to show off the newly installed shatterproof windows of their office skyscraper. Demonstrating the durability of the new glass, the lawyer pressed roughly against it, showing its resistance. But not content with this demonstration, he reared back and ran full tilt into the glass. Unfortunately, the shatterproof glass could only resist such an amount of force, and the lawyer broke through the pane, plummeting to his demise. So, very famous legend. Do you believe this legend to be true or just a legend, a fabrication?
See, the reason I want to believe it's true is because there is almost an identical scene in a movie by the Coen brothers, where it's set a long time ago, and there's a board meeting very high up. The name of the movie is slipping my mind.
Hucksucker Proxy.
Yeah, Hucksucker Proxy. So the executive doesn't say anything. He gets up on the long board table, and he runs towards the table, the windows, and he jumps out, and it breaks. And then they say, okay, well, we got to use plexiglass now. So I'm going to say it is true.
Now,
but I don't know if it is.
Okay, you're saying true. You want it to be true.
I want it to be true, but it's probably not.
Okay, well, if you're saying it's probably not, why do you think it's probably not?
Because why would someone test a window that high up with that potential possibility?
I mean, it does seem counterintuitive, right?
Right.
Well, I have news for you.
Yeah.
This legend is true.
Oh, okay, well, the Coen brothers who made that movie, I'm assuming did their research as well, so they probably were like, what?
And not only is it true, it's somewhat regional because it happened in Toronto.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so this is actually based upon a real account. Not to make light of a tragedy, but there was a man, a lawyer named Gary Hoy, who at the age of 38, he fell from the 24th floor of the Toronto Dominion Bank Tower in 1993. The engineer behind the glass in this structure, he told the Toronto Star, "I don't know of any building code in the world that would allow a 160-pound man to run up against a glass and withstand it." And then in another interview, a spokesperson for the firm mentioned that the glass, in fact, did not break, but it popped out of its frame, leading to the fatal plunge by Hoy.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. So basically, if you want to find out whether the story is legitimate or if it's a fabrication, now I do think bringing up the fact that it was in this movie, Hudsucker Proxy, would normally be an indicator of it being fiction. Maybe it spread because people had saw this movie, it gained in popularity. But it's really easy to do research on this, especially because it's such a recent event, going back to 1993, so just about 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
The sources that I pulled this from included articles from the Toronto Star, the Torontoist, the Toronto Sun. So you can actually find that on the Windsor Public Library's databases page. We actually have archives of newspapers, including the Toronto Sun, so you can actually check that out. The Toronto Star, of course, being probably the most legitimate of those.
Yes.
The actual exploration of the truth of this legend came from Snopes.com, which we referenced a lot last season. Snopes is basically a fact-verifying organization, so they'll take news stories, reports, and they'll actually do independent research to see whether it's true or not, and they'll show how reputable the sources of these claimed incidents or news stories are. So, yeah, Snopes is a great resource. I do highly recommend that.
I also want to add, if anyone wants to see Hudsucker Proxy, if you like any of the movies by the Coen brothers, they did Fargo, No Country for Old Men. That's just some of the movies. We have it. You can borrow it.
From us?
Do we?
From the library.
From the library.
Yes, please borrow it from the library. We love when you borrow our movies.
It could even be on our streaming app.
Ironically enough, the one movie we do not have is Urban Legend.
Is that true?
We'll find out.
Okay.
Okay, so we've unpacked the truth behind one legend. Dave, are you ready for legend 2?
No, but go ahead.
Okay, well, I wouldn't care anyway.
Wow, thanks.
We're going to story numero 2, the skeleton in the tree.
Okay.
There is an urban legend alleging the discovery of a skeleton found in a tree in Miami County, Ohio. This skeleton was discovered along with a diary indicating that these were the remains of Captain Roger Vanderburg. The diary detailed how Captain Vanderburg served during the Battle of Wabash River, aka St. Clair's Defeat, a battle that was fought in the 4th of November, 1791, when the U.S. Army was faced and defeated by the Western Confederacy of Native Americans as part of the Northwest Indian War. So basically the legend is this soldier from this long ago battle, his remains were discovered in a tree.
But when were they discovered?
Well,
doesn't say.
The details of that part of the legend are not shared.
Okay.
So already I'm assuming there's some suspicion because you're questioning when were the remains found.
There's a lot of information there.
There is, yes.
But I'm going to say that's not true.
Okay. So you believe this legend is false?
I think some of the information may be correct, but I don't believe that happened.
Okay, so we have a name of this individual, Captain Roger Vanderburg. We have a diary that was claimed to be found with him, indicating that he was this individual who fought in this war in the 18th century. With that said, what would you do in order to unpack the truth behind the story? What would be your first step?
Well, you could go to Snopes.com. You could also reference some of those books we were mentioning earlier by the person that does all the folk tales and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then you could just start there and branch off from there. You could look up information from that time period. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. For me, we have names, and sometimes for urban legends, we don't get names. So for me, this would be the crucial thing to first determine who is Roger Vanderburg? Does he actually exist? That would be my first thing.
Yeah.
So I will say this urban legend is false.
Okay.
It's not true.
Because at first I thought you said Vanderbeek, and I was thinking, I don't want to wait
James
for my
Vanderbeek?
lives to be over, And he didn't either, clearly, if he had a diary.
No.
But anyways,
I wasn't expecting a Dawson's Creek reference during this episode, so thank you for that.
I wasn't either.
So my first thing for research would be looking up the name Roger Vanderburg, because this is huge. We never get this in legends, not Vanderbeek, of course. So go for the names enlisted as part of the 1791 battle. Simply put, there was no Roger Vanderburg. He was not enlisted. He was not on the register for the battle. And for the U.S. Army, there was never registered a Captain Roger Vanderburg. So already, we've disproven this legend because a Roger Vanderburg was never serving as a captain in the U.S. Army at this point.
He did not exist.
No. Also, there's no substantial records indicating remains were ever discovered in trees in Ohio through the 18th through 20th centuries. So, as you questioned, when were these remains found? I pretty much had a wide breadth doing some exploration of the 18th and 20th centuries because I figured it would have to be somewhere within that very broad period of time. But also cementing this tale as fiction, and I really appreciate this. This exact story actually originated from an 1864 novel. This was a novel called Lost Sir Massingberd by James Payn, in which the characters describe discovering the remains of a lost soldier within a tree. So it could be kind of difficult to figure out where do we begin research with this. I just went straight to the Ohio Historical Society website. They had records there indicating who had enlisted as part of this battle, who was listed as a casualty, those missing in action, and because there was no Vanderburg, there was no legend, so it's not true.
So he didn't have to wait for his life to be over because it never existed.
It never happened. It never started.
Okay, very good, very good. So one yes, one no.
And now we're going to go for number 3 and see if this is true or not. The tale of the choking Doberman.
Oh, this is scary.
Yes, I know. I don't like choking myself, and it's even sadder when dogs choke. This is an urban legend which involves a protective Doberman, which is a type of dog, for those who don't know.
Yeah. It's a dog.
Now, the owner of this dog was shocked to discover that it was choking upon their return home. And they discovered, while trying to dislodge whatever the thing was that was choking the dog, the obstruction, well, when they finally removed it, they found the blockage was actually a pair of human fingers. So this person was mortified. They were panicking as to what possibly could have happened. But they soon noticed a trail of blood leading from their house into a closed storage closet, and upon opening the door, discovered an intruder whose hand was bleeding from a dog bite. So there's a lot of variations, but basically every iteration of the story involves a dog choking, and whether the owner pries the fingers from its throat them on their own or they take it to the vet and it's discovered, this inevitably leads to an intruder or an attacker being found bleeding within the house. So a lot to go on here. This is a very tall tale, presumably, or it could be based in reality. Dave, what's your take on this?
Something like this could happen, but I feel this is not true.
So what is your inkling that this may not be true?
Well, when did this happen?
There's no date.
Who did it happen to?
A person who's a home invader.
And who is that person?
Probably a criminal.
There's no names. There's no dates.
So, okay, as a researcher, you want to find out whether the story is true or not. what's the first thing that you do? And this is something that we've talked about last season. The first thing we should almost always do for any of this research.
I don't know. I'm asking you. What should we
It-
do?
It's been a long time since last season. We always try to find the earliest recorded instance of the story, right?
Okay. So when did this story originate?
It originated June 24th, 1981, as an article in the Phoenix New Times.
Sounds suspicious.
Very suspicious, because the Phoenix New Times, I will let you know, is not the most reputable of newspapers.
It sounds more like a Daily Mail type thing.
Kind of, a little bit tabloidish.
Yeah.
So already, the authenticity of the story comes into question from its source. The article itself was titled, sweetly enough, "Gagging Dog Story Baffles Police." So the actual article tells of a strikingly similar account to the popular legend. A dog is taken to a vet after its owner discovers it is choking, and the police arrive to the owner's house to discover an unconscious intruder, sans fingers, lying in the closet. That's because the police are called after they discover the obstruction in the throat for the dog is, of course, a pair of fingers. Now, the article claims to have learned of the story from an employee of a large industrial plant in the valley. He said he had gotten the story third hand from another employee who, in turn, had said he heard from a woman whose relatives live in Las Vegas who knew the dog's owner. As of Friday, the New Times was not able to nail down the identity of the Doberman's mistress, end quote.
Huh. Okay, so it was like third rate, heard from someone and someone that had relatives in Vegas?
Yeah.
I wouldn't gamble on that.
Oh.
I would say, no, it's not true.
That pun was a real crapshoot, Dave. Well, there was investigations about this article because it became kind of a viral story before the internet. This story spread to other news outlets because it was really such a sensational tale. So as other more reputable news sources investigated the matter, and this involved further investigation by the Phoenix New Times, but also by the Las Vegas Sun, and also the LA Police Department. None of the sources were able to uncover evidence to prove the incident ever occurred. Now, I think this is what cinches it as being simply a legend. The folklorist who we talked about earlier, Jan Harold Brunvand, he and another folklorist named Adrian Mayer both cite older legends and fables as possible influences to the story. So there are some stories that go back centuries in some cases, very similar recountings of pets. They're choking on something. They're not quite sure what. They extract a human arm or a digit, and then they find out there was an intruder or a household invader. So obviously, with the history of this sort of legend being passed around centuries before, coupled with the fact that even the LA police couldn't actually authenticate that any similar story happened, to me, this is clearly a legend. It's false. And if you're looking for sources on this particular legend, you can check out The Choking Doberman and Other Urban Legends by the aforementioned Jan Harold Brunvand, Choking Doberman from the Journal of Folklore Research by Adrian Mayer, and also, of course, the original source, the Phoenix New Times, who, even as a bit of a tabloid paper, already admitted they didn't manage to authenticate any of the information.
All right. Fake.
Fake. So
Not true.
Not true. Okay, we have a few more to get to, and I think you're going to appreciate this next one, if only for the title.
Okay.
It's called Humans Can Lick Too.
I don't like that title.
I don't think you're going to like the tale.
Okay, go ahead.
You're probably familiar with this one. A young woman is alone in her apartment, and she goes to bed with her dog by her side. There's a lot of dogs in these stories, I'm noticing.
Okay.
Anyway, in the middle of the night, she's woken up by a strange sound, and alarmed, she reaches down to her dog for reassurance, who licks her hand. So eventually she goes back to sleep, reassured by the warmth of her dog. But when she awakes in the morning, she finds the dog is not by her side. In fact, stepping into her washroom, the dog has been hung in the shower and written in blood on the shower walls, "Humans can lick too."
That's not true. That just sounds too fantastical.
Okay. So
tell me how you started to research this one.
Oh, okay. So again, what did we say for the last one? What do we always want to do?
Use common sense.
Well, we want to use common sense.
But also, you want to look at the first instance of this story. So where did you find that?
You're going to love this title. Hoser Folk Legends.
I like it already.
Yeah, it's from 1982 by a folklorist named Ronald L. Baker. But the same year, this legend was told around a campfire in a slasher film called Death Screams. Great title for a film, by the way.
Especially a horror film.
Especially a horror film. Probably not so much a romantic comedy. So already this indicates that this was a popular legend by this time in the early 80s. So what we need to do is go back even earlier to figure out, is there any source for the story that happened before this period of time? And in fact, there is, but it's a lot further than you probably imagine.
Okay.
1871.
Oh.
The 70s, the other 70s. So this was actually a diary entry by a Victorian squire named Dearman Burchell. And he wrote a story that he heard at a croquet party, as one does. So this story told by Burchell was about a clergyman. The clergyman was awoken in the night by his wife, who said she heard a robber in the house. He reached his hand down, and his pet bloodhound licked his fingers to reassure him. He said, the dog is calm, therefore everything is fine. In the morning they found their goods had been stolen, and the dog was left outside. So the dog was not murdered in the story.
Oh, that's good.
However, the clergyman ended up having his goods stolen from him.
But if it was a bloodhound, shouldn't it have got the burglar?
You would think so, right?
Yeah.
Maybe he gave him some snacks, some mutton. I think mutton was popular back then. So as often happens with urban legends, even back to this original source, this was not a story that happened to somebody the writer knew firsthand. This was a removed story. He knew the person by proxy because someone else, a guest at this croquet party, heard about this happening to a clergyman. Now, we do need to mention, at the time, the clergy in Victorian England were a little bit scrutinized. It was actually quite a common practice at social gatherings in which amusing but admittedly fanciful stories were shared to mock members of the clergy. And even if this humorous tale was based on true events, the story does not involve a slain dog nor a lone female victim. There's also no newspaper or police reports existing, in spite of research by different folklorists to corroborate that this legend has any truth in a modern setting. So this is going to be unusual. I'm going to say this story is mostly false. We can't completely disregard that this never happened to this clergyman that was referenced in this particular journal entry, but at the same time, the actual legend about the lone females being alone in her apartment, being reassured by the dog, finding her dog murdered when she awoke the next morning, there's no evidence to support that. So it is mostly false.
Mostly false. Okay.
Mostly false. You can actually find that legend in the Encyclopedia of Urban Legends by Jan Harold Brumvand. And if you want the original source from that 18th century, you can go to The Diary of a Victorian Squire by Dearman Burchell. So 2 more stories to go, and they've mainly been false so far. We're going to see
except the first one.
Well, except for the first one, but we're going to see if things change up a little bit. You're going to like this next story. I think you have heard of this character before. He kind of sounds like a Dick Tracy character.
Uh-huh.
Charlie No Face.
Oh, that's so familiar.
Is it really?
No.
Okay. So here's the legend of Charlie No Face. In Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, there is a figure with severely burned features. His face is completely burned, and he lurks around an abandoned train tunnel at night. He is capable of making electricity go haywire with his very presence. Many have reported seeing this mysterious figure, but they are too frightened to follow him, and he turns back to the dark train tunnels to disappear. Does Charlie No Face exist?
I'm going to say yes, because you were hinting that there might be some true stories here.
Okay, so there's some good detective work there, but not for the story.
The story, it's missing a lot of things. Okay? Like Charlie No Face, how did he become that way? They said how he became that way, but they didn't give any more background.
So you said we found out the origin, but we really didn't. All we heard was that there was this man with a severely burned face who's lurking around train tunnels. Apparently, he can make electricity do weird things with his very presence.
Yeah.
So you're inclined to say it's true, but again,
I don't think it's true.
okay.
I think, but then again, we have to look into it. Okay. How did you find this story?
Well, I'm glad you asked. There's actually a book published, which I do recommend checking out, because in addition to this legend, it talks about many other great urban legends around the Pennsylvania region. It's called, simply put, Weird Pennsylvania, by an author named Matt Lake. There's also another compilation of stories released by Jan Harold Brumvend titled Be Afraid, Be Very Afraid. This legend is also articulated in it. You're going to be surprised. This story is true. Mostly.
Okay.
You're like, what does that mean? Okay.
Tell us.
So there is a figure who has been referred to as Charlie No Face. He was based on a real person, except his name wasn't Charlie. This person's real name was Raymond Robinson. And this was a man who actually had a pretty tragic backstory. He suffered from a severe accident at the age of 8. When he was climbing a pole to investigate a bird's nest, the young Raymond was electrocuted. And that left him with a disfigured face, losing his eyes and nose, as well as his right arm. So during his life, Raymond obviously became a bit reclusive. He didn't have a lot of people to assist him in his life, and because of the type of ridicule and gawking that would happen if he was out during the day, he mainly stayed in during the day and left his abodes at night to walk around. Now, despite what the legend says, Raymond was actually very friendly. In fact, he would let teenagers take pictures of him in exchange for cigarettes. Now, in terms of the elements about the electronic devices and lights going haywire in his presence, where do you think this stems from?
The untruth.
Well, certainly that didn't happen. There were no reported cases of
But probably
that.
from the story that he got electrocuted. Yeah.
Exactly. This is one of those cases where the origins of Raymond's disfigurement was embellished, and the erratic behavior of this electronic equipment around him was just an extension and a fabrication of the real-life origin of his tragedy. So, in terms of Charlie No Face being a ghoul haunting these dark train tunnels, yeah, it certainly is an embellishment, but it is really based in truth. Now, why do you think the legend spread, though? Because we have talked about how urban legends almost always impart a sort of moral or ethical idea.
Well, maybe just to beware of people in the night.
Yeah.
Things like that.
And also, they were talking about how he's around abandoned train tunnels. So
Keep people away.
exactly, just
like
to
teens
dissuade
and stuff.
children and teens from loitering around there. So yeah, while embellished, this urban legend is firmly rooted in fact.
And something I'm wondering, because you did make this reference earlier. There's a character in Dick Tracy known as Blank Face, who has no face.
Mm-hmm.
Is it influenced by this character?
I could not find any information on that, but I would say
Or the Blank was his name, the Blank.
The Blank. Well, I would say there were characters like that preceding The Blank in other types of pulp fiction. But still, with that said, I do think the real-life tragedy of Raymond Robinson probably influenced a lot of fictional characters. And also, if you want more stories to back up the authenticity of this, you can actually go to the Beaver County Times. They have an archive there of some old newspaper clippings, and that involves stories about Robinson and actually talking about the accident. And it features some photographs of Robinson with teenagers as well to verify that this is, in fact, while embellished, a true urban legend.
Interesting.
So we have one final urban legend, Dave.
Okay.
And I think we're going to be going out on what I like to call a doozy.
Okay. Let's go.
So we're going to go. This is the story of the Funhouse Corpse.
You're scaring me already.
The Funhouse Corpse. Have you ever been to a funhouse?
Yeah.
They're not that fun, actually.
They're kind of fun.
I mean, I don't know. If you like sitting around like a stinky maze for an hour and eating stale popcorn, I guess it's okay.
Wow. I don't know.
If you like mirrors, do you like mirrors?
I love mirrors.
No wonder you like funhouses. I, for one, hate them. So, all you funhouse enthusiasts out there, don't care for them.
Anyways, I don't have an issue with them. I haven't been to one since I've been a kid. So.
Well, that's probably good because you could run into a corpse, according to this legend. So, here's the legend itself. In the 1970s, a film crew were setting up a location shoot at an abandoned funhouse, and as per usual, lights were set up, cameras prepared, and set pieces were being moved around for the day's upcoming shoot. During the setup, a production worker went to move a prop of a hanging man from the shoot, only to discover that this was no dummy. This was an actual human cadaver strung up in the middle of the amusement park.
Scary.
Very scary to think that you're in such an innocuous place like an amusement park and then there happens to be this dead body. With that said, we do have a time frame from the 1970s.
Okay.
We have a location, not a particular location, but we do know that it's at an amusement park. We know there is a film crew shooting something there. So, based off of all of this, what do you think? Is this story true or not? And how would you start your research?
Well, they didn't name the movie. They didn't name any of the crew. They didn't name the person that they found. I would start by questioning the story's origin like we always do.
Okay.
So, is this like a newspaper story? How did this start?
Mm-hmm. Now, just purely off of instinct, or maybe just from what you've heard already in the shared legend, do you think it's true or do you think this is false?
I think it's false.
You're going to be shocked to discover this is true.
Okay.
And actually, the legitimacy of what's shared in the urban legend, it pretty much coheres to what the actual root or origin of the story is. So, of all the TV shows, you're going to love this. It was on the shoot for an episode of The $6 Million Man.
Oh my God. Wow.
And it was in 1976. The crew for this episode were filming at the New Pike Amusement Park in Long Beach, California. When a production worker moved a funhouse hanging man, the body's arm came off and inside was a human bone. Now, of course, they were trying to figure out, is this an actual body? Why does it have a bone inside? So they did some digging around and they were able to come up with the story. These were the remains of a train robber named Elmer McCurdy. McCurdy had died during a shootout with police after a train robbery in Oklahoma in 1911. Now, this story is actually very fascinating, and you can find the information where I got this from a couple of different sources, including Modern Mummies by Christine Quigley and Elmer McCurdy, The Life and Afterlife of an American Outlaw by Mark Svenvold. So, after his death, McCurdy's mummified corpse was left unclaimed, and the undertaker who performed the work on the body refused to bury it or release the remains until he was paid for his services, because no one's claiming the body, no one's paying for the services. Now, deciding to make some money for his labor, the undertaker put the body up on display at an Oklahoma funeral home as the bandit who wouldn't give up. After years of bringing in money as a sideshow attraction for the undertaker, the remains were purchased and became a fixture of the traveling carnival circuit in the 1920s up into about the 1960s, and they changed hands multiple times. Now, eventually it was sold to the Pike Amusement Park, where it was hung in the Funhouse exhibition. The owner of the park was aware that the body was an actual cadaver and marketed it as such, but as the park changed hands, that kind of fell through the cracks, and workers just assumed this was a prop dummy and treated it as such. And that's how come this cadaver was left over for this film crew to discover in 1976.
So wait a minute. When did this bank robber originally die?
1911.
And then they mummified him?
Which I was confused about because I didn't think that was a common practice, but I guessed, especially in the region where they were, in order to preserve the remains, especially if the embalmer or the undertaker wasn't certain if the remains were going to be claimed by anyone, it was a relatively cheap and quick process to perform.
And it lasted that long?
It lasted that long. It's amazing to think, right?
I thought it would maybe last a year.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was sturdy. They don't build undertakers like they used to.
Apparently not.
So again, lots of sources verifying that. So we talked quite a bit about various urban legends in this episode. I think the big takeaway is when you hear these sort of viral news stories or anecdotes, you always want to figure out what is the source of it. As we said, what's the original iteration of the story? try to do some research to figure that out to determine whether it's true or not. And then based off of that, also think about the agenda. Is there a reason that the story spreads? To give some sort of warning or a moral lesson by spreading the story? The amusement park one, I think, is very obvious. It's an amusement park. It was abandoned. The idea is don't go around abandoned places because you don't know what you're going to find. It could be something frightening. But, this story was co-opted, a very amazing and sensationalist story, but one that was true, but eventually was spreading around, making its way in this mimetic fashion in order to discourage people from going into abandoned buildings. And the same thing could be said about the story of Charlie No Face. There's warnings about living alone, such as the tale of the choking Doberman or Humans Can Lick Too. So, yeah, I think the main takeaway is scrutinize these urban legends to say, what is the source of them, and is there an agenda behind them? So, Dave,
didn't expect that last one.
You didn't expect that last one, no. With that said, folks, if there's any urban legends, tall tales, or viral news stories that you want us to talk about on Fiction or Nonfiction, I actually do highly encourage you to send us an email. Email askalibrarian@windsorpubliclibrary.com, and in the subject line put Fiction or Nonfiction, and give us your suggestions, and maybe your suggestion will appear on a future episode.
Great idea.
Last season, we had a thing we called Random Dave Facts. Do we have that this season?
Oh, we do.
Oh, boy.
I actually have multiple. So I'm going to start with just an easy one.
Ooh, okay.
Random facts. So it's a little different than the true or not true thing that we've been doing the entire episode.
Because these are just true.
Maybe. You tell me.
Well, if they're not true, they're not a fact.
You do this every time.
Because you do it every time.
Okay, here's a fact, okay? My question is, the fact is the sky is blue. Everyone knows that. But why is the sky blue? Here's a random fact as to why. The sky is blue, mostly. Sometimes it changes color. But the sky is actually blue because sunlight reaches the Earth's atmosphere and is scattered in all directions by all the gases and particles in the air. Blue light is scattered more than other colors because it travels as shorter, smaller waves. That's why we see blue more in the sky than we see the other colors.
Interesting. Huh.
So if you're wondering where I got this from, I didn't just make it up. There's multiple places you can find it. There's multiple science books. You can find this through the Windsor Public Library, any sort of science fact books that deal with,
science facts,
environment and things like that. But I got this from a NASA website, nasa.gov.
That's pretty reputable.
So they have a section, and a lot of these facts are for kids that are learning things, but this is where I got the most concise, non-convoluted answer, because it goes into great detail as to why these things happen.
No, of course, and I know we're giving like a very simplified explanation of how that happens. So I will say explanations for children, it's pretty much our level, so that's good.
They have a site called spaceplace.nasa.gov, and they have all sorts of facts about space and the universe and everything. So that's where I got this fact from, and there's your random Dave fact. That is why the sky is blue.
Well, what's making me blue is the fact that we're just about done this episode. Dave, thank you for hearing these 6 spooky urban legends, and we're going to be back next time to talk about another story that might be true or false, but we're going to have to discover which it is. So until then, I'm Adam.
I'm Dave.
And this has been Fiction
or Nonfiction.